Preston. I'm the coordinator for the Furniture Design and Wood Department here at Anderson Ranch. Welcome to our summer faculty lecture series. I wanted to welcome our virtual participants watching tonight, as well as our Board of Trustees and National Council. Thank you for your support. Tonight we will be hearing from artists Betsy, Schneider, and Katy, Barkan. Before we begin, please silence your phones. We don't want any phones going off, so please silence them now. And for our land acknowledgement, Anderson Ranch acknowledges that our campus resides on the traditional and ancestral territory of the Ute people who called the Roaring Fork Valley and beyond home for over 800 years. Through our mission to promote a wide range of arts and culture and voices, we commit to partner with and honor the indigenous ancestors and residents of the sacred land where we learn, work, and create. So first, let's introduce Betsy Schneider. Betsy Schneider's photography and video work has been exhibited nationally and internationally and is part of many notable collections. She was a Guggenheim Fellow in 2011, and her book, To Be 13, a result of that fellowship, was published by Radius in 2017. Her current project, The Best Girl on the Team, consists of 50 interviews and portraits with people who have been the only girl on a sports team. Please join me in welcoming Betsy.
Okay, I have to start with a confession. I know, Andrea, where is she? She's not here. Okay, because she would laugh at me because the talk I gave yesterday, I thought I was supposed to make a 5-minute presentation, but I was supposed to make a 30-minute presentation. And today I made like maybe like an hour presentation. So buckle your seatbelts. I'm gonna go pretty fast through this. Still, altitude issues still going on. Anyway, I'll stop talking about talking. Okay, so this is an old picture of me. I like to kind of dig to the past, to look back a lot. I have a lot of nostalgia, and a lot of my work is about time. So this is me getting my first camera. This is a picture my father took of me and my sister. This is the first picture I ever took, my parents. This I'm gonna skip over, but deeply influential book from my childhood. And then I'm gonna do something that really you're not supposed to do, but I'm gonna show some really old work, like when I was 13. And I had a darkroom in my closet. And then this was early work that I did when I was in an undergrad. And for me, this is important because a lot of these interests have thread their way through my work to today. I was interested in issues of childhood, pre-adolescence. These are, androgyny. These two girls that I lived with and took care of. I was interested in who you're supposed to love, who you're supposed to raise. I really am trying to go fast about this. So I photographed these two girls when I was an undergrad at Michigan and then at the School of the Art Institute. Spent a year in Prague, sat in cafes, scribbled, tried to figure out what to do with my life, and was all angsty and drank a lot of beer. And I came back, and a couple years later, I ended up being a live-in assistant for Sally Mann. Yeah, and that really was what it felt like working for Sally Mann. That look is how she looks at you. And when I was working for Sally, I had been photographing children, and I was interested in children. I'd been interested in them my whole life. And I get to her house, and I was not gonna photograph children. So I was like, what can I photograph? So I started doing something I told myself when I was an art student I would never do, because it always seemed kind of self-serving and narcissistic. So I started doing self-portraits. And I thought, I'm trying to make them look bad. And looking back 35 years later, I kind of laugh at myself, thinking about how you think about yourself when you're 25 and what looks bad. Anyway, this led me to graduate school. And I went to graduate school at Mills College, which sadly is not Mills College anymore. And I was photographing, like still interested in like the body, and I was interested in like myself and, you know, weird things and getting inside, like maybe inside my mouth, maybe this. And I have to give my professors credit, particularly Catherine Wagner, who just like, nah, it's not close enough. Oh, this chiaroscuro color or black and white, beautiful thing, you need it to be tougher. So finally, I actually started photographing someone else, and I was using a view camera, and I kind of like literally like was cramming the camera down. It ended up being my husband. Ended up kind of cramming it down his throat. He was very tolerant for a while. I think like I even like gave him a burn from the strobe lights at some point. So after grad school, well, we'll keep going. I am going fast. Oh, and I did a couple more projects similarly. I did it with fruit. And then a couple years later, when my second child was born, I asked to keep the placenta. He was born in Norway, and we have it on tape. The midwife was like, yeah, sure, weird American, you can keep the placenta. So I took these pictures, and I think they were more successful as an idea than an actual object. But anyway, it was still part of this interest in kind of getting inside the body. Okay, so after grad school, I moved with Frank to London, and we had our first kid. And I had always, as someone said to me in grad school, you're biologically programmed to photograph children. This is like a need in your DNA. So I started photographing my daughter, and then later my son with a Mamiya 7. Took me a long time to figure out actually how to get a good picture, because if you guys know, there's a few photographers here, but Mamiya 7, you can't get closer than a meter, so I was taking those really close-up pictures. So I was like, it took me a long time to kind of figure out how to photograph with that. But I ended up carrying that camera around for like the next 15 years. It was like in the diaper bag and the soccer bag. When we went away in the summer, it kind of allowed me to do art as I was doing the parent thing. So I took this series of pictures that I still find kind of hard to talk about, actually, in some ways. I think I understand them better the further away I am, now that the kids are grown up. So it was my kids. This is actually my cousin's son. And this is, anyone who saw my presentation the other day knows this picture got a little bit of play in a little media storm a couple years ago, but I'm not going to go into it. There's a recording. You guys can watch that if you didn't see it. So this was like getting me through. I am on faculty at ASU, and I was like a professor kind of working towards tenure, so it was like you just want to make work. So I was like balancing, my kids. And I was always really, really interested in like the inner world of children. I mean, that's part of it. It's not just, hopefully not just, oh, they're so cute, but I really have always, since I was a little kid myself, been interested in that. Big fan of like Maurice Sendak, and just this like, I could go on about this, but. So my kids got older, they got less photogenic. Can I say that? They get less photogenic. The one thing that actually happened is when you're at eye level, it's great. When you have to start all of a sudden pointing the camera up at them, and they're both actually a lot bigger than me now. So I've tried again, yeah. Okay, so this is something I could talk about a lot. It's my controversial work. I'm going to go through it relatively quick. It is when my daughter was born, her dad and I started photographing her every day. And again, there's so much to say about this. Again, if you watch the recording, I talk very extensively about the controversy. I've tried for years to not talk about the controversy and talk about the work. And I was like, today I'm just going to do that. So this is a year of photographs of her. And it just seemed totally natural to me that we would, like, let me go back to the first one, like to see, like, when does her umbilical stump fall off? And, what happens? When does her body change? And I was, I have to admit I wasn't totally surprised, and I hated when people called me naive when the work started to get censored and have controversy. But on the other hand, I mean, the idea that these pictures would exist in any other way just didn't seem right. She also, she's a very, actually continues to be, but she's a pleaser. And that feels a little bit bad to say, but let's go through this and come up to what happened. So the pictures taught me a lot about control. Like, I had this idea that they were going to be these perfect, Reineke Dijkstra meets August Sander meets, science, right? And they were all going to be super perfect pictures, and they weren't perfect. And, back here, she's learning to walk. I was so frustrated, but then I learned to love these things. And again, the reactions that people had to them were sometimes surprising. I had to adjust in a lot of different ways. And again, at this point, Frank and I are really doing this together. Sorry, I am trying to do it really, really quick, and I feel like I'm jumping over things. Anyway, eventually she got older. She started wearing clothes. It was a part of our life. And then people would ask me, how long are you going to do it? And I was like, as long as we can. I had the fantasy dorm room, she's in her dorm room, and that's the end of the project. But what happened is it ended, it didn't end then. It ended, let's go here. It ended in 2009 when she was 11 because I fell in love with a woman and we got separated. So this project became about time. It became about control. It became about our family. Frank was a collaborator. I will not say that Madeline was a collaborator because an infant cannot be a collaborator. But something happened. Anyway, I kind of buried the work for years. I didn't show it. There was between the controversy and then the kind of painful ending of it. And there's so many pictures. I didn't know what to do with it. So I buried it for years. And then about 3 years ago, I was teaching a class on censorship. And I had Madeline come to the class, and one of the students asked her, well, what do you think about this work? Do you want to show it? And she said to the student, she goes, yeah, we worked so hard on it. It'd be really a shame. And I didn't know that she felt so connected to the work. And I also talked to Frank, to her father, and he's like, he still calls it our project. So we decided to finish it. And then I'm going to go back up. And I came here a year and a half ago and worked with Esther and Matthew, and we finished the project and kind of completed it and resolved it. Again, there's so much more to say. And I'm just going to bring you up to speed of a couple other projects. I hope I'm doing okay with time. As mentioned, I got a Guggenheim Fellowship to photograph 13-year-olds around the time my daughter was 13. It was also the time a little bit after the time I got separated, and I was really thinking about adolescence, and I was really remembering my own adolescence. And right, so of course, what do? Disrupt your child's life majorly. And I was like, okay, what can I do with this? How can I make art about this? So I got this idea of, photographing and making video interviews with 13-year-old kids. This is actually my stepson. So I interviewed them. The interviews actually turned out to be, I think, more powerful than the pictures. And I'm just going to go quickly through these portraits. It was kind of incredible, especially the interviews. talking to them, asking them just to talk and hear what they thought about. They were at this age where, when this boy, I asked him, like, how would you describe yourself? And he's like, I guess I'm smart and athletic, kind of. He was so unwilling to brag about himself. He was so shy, it like hurt a little bit. And then this kid was kind of a jerk, but but it was an intense project, and you know, it was like that they would open up to me for the hour I spent with them, and then some of them that I would see other places, like kids who went to my daughter's school, they would like act like they didn't know me, and it was this like little window that they gave me. He wanted to be photographed in the graveyard. He's like, let's meet at the graveyard. I was like, okay. And this kid, he was so sad. His mom had died, and he had a twin brother who was kind of a bully. And you could just, I mean, you can see it in the picture. I don't want to project too much onto the pictures, but he was just like, the weight of the world was on. I mean, like, kind of want to cry right now when I think about him. This kid, when I asked him to describe himself, he said, I'm kind. This girl and her friend wanted to dress up and play. And they were like, we are still kids. We're going to play. And so they wore these matching outfits and were kind of made a game of it. I think they were poking fun at me a little bit too, but. So this is just some shots from the interviews. And yeah, I mean, the interviews were pretty incredible. And I'm not taking credit. I just turned on the camera and asked him a few questions. Okay, so lately, 10 years ago, I resigned my tenure position at Arizona State, and I moved to Boston to be with my now wife and her kids, and my life kind of turned upside down. I ended up teaching an online program for ASU, so I've stayed connected. But I was like, who am I? My kids went to live with their dad in Norway. Sorry, I'm just going to stay here. My kids went to live with their dad in Norway, and I had this whole, like, who am I? What am I doing? And I feel like the last kind of 10 years of my life have been trying to figure out, like, what's next. I'm going to go back. I'm going to go through this really quickly and then get to the point that I'm getting to about my own identity. This is just some family stuff, like my parents and my grandparents. I've been kind of trying to go back into their archives. Both my grandfathers had these same cameras that they filmed. This is actually, they did not know each other. They were in totally different places. But that's my mom and my aunt, the same Christmas. Obviously, there were books that told people how to film, like up and down, but I still thought it was pretty incredible. And I learned a little bit about my grandfathers, actually, and my maternal grandmother, because I think she was behind the camera sometimes too, about them through watching these films. This is 2 pictures of my mother, maybe the first picture ever made, and certainly the last picture ever made of her. So one's with an 8mm movie camera, the other's with an iPhone. My grandmother carried these around, these like Save the Children photos, and I've for some reason inherited them. For those of you who don't know, it was like you would send off $5 a month and you'd be given a child. You know, you'd be given this photo of a child, and when she died, these were in her wallet. So that's been kind of interesting to me. And then I found these like contact sheets, self-portraits that my grandfather had made, or portraits, I'm not sure. All right, I'm gonna go quickly through this. No time. All right, so I'm trying to figure out what's next after, because people are like, you gotta stop photographing adolescents. And I only kind of halfway did it when I started photographing my son's soccer team. This was the first time I tried an 8x10 camera, and I was like, you kind of can't go wrong with like young people, and that's part of the problem. People are like, stop just photographing young people. So I photographed my son's soccer team, and then I had this big plan to photograph my daughter's, she was on the University of Michigan rowing team, and I started, and about a month before COVID ended everything, the NCAA was like, you can't be photographing these kids for art. So it was an abortive project, but I still was interested in like these young, like really tough female athletes. There was something about like the strength and the intensity and actually this is my daughter's getting married to her, but anyway, you just have to say that's my daughter's partner. But there was just something about that I really wanted to capture. And the next couple projects are gonna kind of be things that are in progress or I'm trying to figure out. So anyway, so that ended. But it ended up another project took over. So I was saying about my whole kind of identity crisis. I ended up starting another project in 2017 where I made a list of all these like identity traits I had. And this one I have not done yet, so I don't know why I'm showing it to you guys, but the 2 years that my son was 12 to 14, and when he turned 13, he called me up and he said, "This is ironic, Mom, that you're not with me." It was really painful, but the coda is, he's 23, and guess what? He just re-upped for another year living with me. So like, when he was 13, I was crying myself to sleep, and now I'm like, when do you think you're gonna move out? And this is also something that maybe didn't weather time very well, like, ooh, Skype screenshots. But, so that's one category. That's a few more of them. And then, this is just my newest title. I'm like halfway through this like thing where I'm photographing redheads and interviewing them about what does it mean to have red hair. I think I need to finish it before my hair goes totally white. So this is like, I mean, any of you who know Bo can know that this is actually kind of old. So this was one project that's in progress. But the one that was mentioned, and it's not, there's one more after this, was I played on a boys soccer team when I was 13, and it was a super, and I played on a flag football, but let's say that one. It was a super influential experience. So I ended up getting a grant to photograph 50, women and girls who had been the only girl on a team. And I haven't totally resolved what it's supposed to look like. I'm kind of stuck. I confess I have a hard time with that last 10% of projects. But I met just incredible people. She actually went up to the majors this year. I think she went back down, but she's just awesome. And she got kicked off her 8th grade team because she was too good. The other teams were complaining that she was making their boys look bad. She went to the WNBA, but I mean, man, can you imagine that? There's more I could say. She was her mom went to court for her right to play Little League Baseball when she was 10, 8 maybe. And then she became one of the first fire chiefs in Oakland. Track team in the 70s. Anyway, I'm gonna round it up really quickly with the last thing that I've just started doing this year, which is, I was born in 1965, and a month ago today I turned 60, freaked me out. I ended up have some students who are turning 60, so I got this idea of doing this project. So first I did this kind of self-involved kind of thing where I I actually did this summer, I found a picture of myself from every year. But the real meat of this project is, guess what? I'm going around finding, I'm trying to find 120, but I'm at about 50 right now, people who are turning 65. My wife is not convinced that pictures of 60-year-olds is going to be very interesting. She's kind of pushing me. She's like, you gotta do something else. You gotta do something with it. But, so I've been doing this summer, going around and talking to people. It may just be a psychological thing just for me. Anyway, So that's what I'm working on now. If any of you were born in 1965 and want to be part of it, please let me know. But yeah, I'm going to do one last, I'm going to say one last thing, is in the middle there, you may see the African-American man. He's Dred Scott, and I've been thinking about him a lot lately because he's a controversial artist. He's also has these T-shirts you can buy that say, that like the DEA shirts, but they say DEI. They're gonna be big. Get those shirts. But also, I just called him up randomly. We went to school together. We didn't know each other. I called him up. I said, will you be in this project? He's like, sure. And we just, it was awesome. And I've just had some really great experiences. Are they art? I'm not sure. So anyway, this is where I am now. And I hope that I didn't take up too much time. And thank you for listening. Should I unplug the...
Thank you very much, Betsy. So next we have Katy Barkan, the principal of Now Here, a Los Angeles-based architecture practice working at the intersection of the speculative and the everyday. Her work includes building furniture, exhibitions, and collaborations with artists. She was a Rome Prize Fellow in 2021 and teaches at UCLA School of Architecture and Urban Design. Please help me welcome Katy.
Is this the HDMI? Here. Well, thank you, Betsy, for setting the pace. I think I have a similar problem, which is like a whole lot of things in a little bit of time, and I'm like just rapid fire. So bear with me. And first of all, just like what a treat to get to be here at Anderson Ranch. I feel like a little bit of an anomaly of being an architect teaching here, and it's been a pleasure to sort of rethink the way I talk about my work, the way I kind of, what I foreground and when I'm talking to people who are primarily makers. You know, us architects, we like to think a lot, you know, and then we kind of like make drawings for other people to make, and we don't get to engage the stuff itself very much, so it's been a real pleasure. So like Lane said, let me see, how am I gonna advance? Is this moving? Oh yeah, 1 second. All right. You know, I teach as well as practice, so my kind of, my trajectory has been very two-pronged, so I won't talk so much about the pedagogy, but I invite you all to come and see what we're working on in the sculpture studio, and I'll just focus today on my practice, which is, you know, very much an architectural practice. I'm engaged in Los Angeles. Like, I really think a lot about what it means to build in Los Angeles within the context of that, those kind of labor practices, the knowledge practices, you know, the material practices, et cetera, that emerge from a city like LA. And that's kind of informed a practice that's sort of trying to situate itself both in a speculative realm, but also very much kind of rooted in the material grain of building and the problems that arise from that. So my work is kind of always skirting the line between wanting to both fit in and stick out. This is my first project that I made, and I'll talk about that a little bit, but kind of trying to think about the context in which I'm working in, and how is it that the kind of my work can both kind of like can flicker somewhere between being normative and other, and what comes out of that. yeah, I think that where it kind of starts to intersect with what we're doing here at the ranch is like where this starts to kind of find its way into representational and material practices that form a kind of feedback loop in the way that I work. So just jumping in, I'm going to show you, I have 7 projects to show, and I'll try and go quickly. The first is Half House, which was the first house that I did, and here it is. This was actually, as cliched, a house for my sister, the first one. The house is really essentially like a cut of an existing house where we kind of added an extra volume on top. But the idea behind the house was to cut against the sort of idea of the suburban house as a space apart, as a boundary between front and back, and instead to cleave the center and provide a kind of setback between the 2 volumes that would invite you in very immediately and produce like a straight through cut to the inside. So, you have this kind of, on the left, the black volume is the like typical construction, and on the right you have something that's sort of taut and volumetric, stereotomic, something like rocky and strange, and yet also resembles the thing next to it. When you enter, that cut between sort of produces a big void between and allowing light to come through, and also a connection from above and below. Here, I wanted to put this slide in because so much of the work is like, at least in architecture, we have to convince someone to do this all the time, right? And you have to also kind of figure out how to work within the means and methods of kind of the world. So for me, so much about this project was about instructing the framers to basically produce the house next door, but rotate it 45 degrees, right? And clip the roof in a different way. So working within the kind of folds and creases that are everywhere, to sort of ground the formalism that my work was taking on at the time. But I think what I want to really say about this project is that as I was working on this, I started making a series of models, and these models were actually made out of asphalt shingles. So I started working with the material of construction to produce the representation of the project itself, and that started to create really strange effects. Like, the model wants to represent something other and something that gets bigger, but the material is resistant to that. The material doesn't scale. The implications of that would be something very, very strange. And so that sort of working between abstraction and materiality was kind of a driving force. And I think the conclusion of this project really started to fuel a research agenda in my work. So the next project I'll show, that's weird, it's called 6 Work Surfaces, and this is an installation that I did at UCLA where I similarly started to work with this kind of the juxtaposition of a kind of materialism and, say, conceptualism or abstraction. So here, there was an intervention in the gallery. The gallery was kind of constructed of these very normative homosote pinup, white walls, vertical, with all of the kind of attendant sort of posture of neutrality and sort of, that. And then I started to work with the shadow projections of those walls on the ground as these kind of misbehaving red carpeted figures that were like, quite juicy, thick pile, etc. So this is sort of how we started our work here, starting with collage, just quick collages, to understand the relationships and the kind of figures that these walls could produce, and then to overlay them with these shadows, reified shadows of kind of, what architectural drawings do, which we don't usually come upon space that's kind of hovering between something representational and real, right? So, here you have the kind of the red as one shadow and the hatch as a kind of more phenomenal shadow. So these became these kind of studies of these figures, which then were realized in the space. And I think started to invite a really different way of occupying. I think there's a political, I think here, like not among architects, I can speak more explicitly to the kind of queer project and the feminist project and the ways that one might unfold the kind of architectural white, all of that stuff. I was really trying to work through that and thinking about what it would look like to walk around barefoot in the gallery, to sit, et cetera. And then, this started to produce a way of drawing also. So thinking about elevation, which is the kind of the frontal vertical plane, and plan, and how plan, which is, let's say, usually dictates how we move through space, how plan and elevation might start moving you in different directions or wanting different things, and what kind of conflicts could arise from that. So that was sort of the beginning of a trajectory which you'll see continuing on. This is the work that I did at the American Academy, where I was really interested in if the white wall was kind of, the white wall is to architecture as like the obelisk is to like all form or something. Like the obelisk is like the metaphysical essential form. Hi, kiddo. So Rome has more obelisks than anywhere in the world. There's 18 of them. These are these totally enigmatic, stone monoliths. In the kind of research before going, I was really interested in how, on one hand, the obelisks are supposed to be the most kind of mute and singular form there could be, a ray from the sky, a single prism, but in fact, they hold all of these epistemologies in them, right? They're linguistic, they're geological, they're erotic, they're monumental. There are so many things. And so I was really interested in locating a project about multiplicity and sort of unfolding the many out of this thing that was supposed to be so singular. So, the obelisk is like so overwhelming in scale in elevation and so tiny in plan. Right? So this idea of the big small thing or the small big thing really kind of started here. And so I was out in Rome looking at how the obelisks like impose themselves and how they start to create and produce territories or call in territories far beyond themselves. And that kind of moved into the studio in a variety of ways, through collage, black and white collage. Thinking about brittleness and monolithicity, like thinking about that kind of the chunk and the hollowness of that, and working with slip casting. And then that all ended up manifesting in making a 1-to-1 scale of the Vatican obelisk in the cortile of the American Academy. So it just so happened that the American Academy cortile measured, the clear distance was 83 feet, which is exactly the height of the Vatican obelisk, so it had to be. And in order to accomplish that, I suspended it. So I made a hollow, taut, white form, and the pink that you're seeing below is the cast shadow. So if we look from here, it's the cast shadow of the standing obelisk. And I was interested as well in kind of bringing, if we associate certain materials with the monumental, but I was really interested in another kind of monumental language, which one might argue that the most ubiquitous material in Rome is the scaffolding netting, the preservation, the material, the gravel pavers that are holding all the piazzas together, et cetera. So I took all the materials from the gardening shed of the American Academy and made the project out of that. So the cardinal pink, papal socks, and the scaffolding netting. So what ends up getting produced is a monument that sort of denies, you can't really ever view it. It's always sort of episodic. You can kind of see it in segments. And then, what is normally the vertical is now horizontal. What is sort of, a void or like a kind of solid now becomes a void, a kind of communicating line, and then, just a little video of it so you kind of understand that it's also extremely light, and it moving. And we did some amazing puppet shows on it at night. So, again, I think the feminist project is, getting clearer, in taking the obelisk and, quite literally putting it down. It also was the beginning of our conversations. Kathy was in Rome at the time as well, working on the Vatican. So that started kind of our conversation. So, the things that sort of came up were the unexpected multiplication. Like I had an idea of what was going to happen, and then there was all these other things. Like the kind of verticality of the tree became like really interesting relative to this horizontal figure, and here it is from above. So just to bring it back down, so here's here's how this becomes a house, if you will. So like I get to do that, and that's so exciting. And then I also practice in this medium that is like extremely resistant, like, and maybe we all feel that, I don't know, but I do. It's very hard to kind of convince someone to like do this as a house. So I kind of sublimated the desire, into this project called Slip House, where this idea of the surfaces that don't behave, right? The surfaces that like defy the decorum of like where they're supposed to be. Like the bathroom is behind a door, the kitchen is over here, the carpet is in the closet where we get to feel like sensual, like those kinds of all of the like entanglements of those materials start to like leak and bleed and move out of the spaces of the house. So like here you're seeing the brick of the kitchen is sort of slipping out of the kitchen into the backyard. The kind of black and white there is the bar area that starts to kind of move into the kitchen. The bathrooms, all the tile of the bathrooms stretch out into the corridors. So you may close the door, but the bathroom is still there. So these, started as these kind of speculative drawings and model making, again, like working with materials that, some combination of 3D printing and actual material, trying to contend with that. I make a lot of drawings, about what the work is about. But here you can see these sort of vignettes of these slips. And this house is now complete, but I don't yet have proper photography of it, so bear with me. As you'll see a lot of construction photos. But here's kind of these moments where we actually, as the project was coming through, we started to question whether the diagonal was necessary or not, or like the slip itself. Like, so in some ways there's some reduction of some of the I don't know about radicality, but there's some restraint there. But then there's kind of in other ways, I think that emphasizes and strengthens what we're trying to do. So here's two moments kind of looking back and forth. And then, my students might relate to this, but like, how does this start to get resolved all the way down to the corners and so on? And like, how does the brick, the brick as it hits a diagonal doesn't want to do that. So where do you cut it, and how do you start to create these other patterns and other systems of reading within that? So here's a couple of other moments, the bathroom coming out, the moment in the corridor where the kind of living areas and the private, so to speak, areas come into play, or the carpeted and the tiled, et cetera. So that's like how the games are starting to play out. And I think we're getting, I say we because I have a wonderful team working with me, and architecture takes a lot of people, so shout out. So this is becoming increasingly, I think we're getting more bold. This is a project that's under construction right now. It just finished framing. It's in Echo Park, and it's an interesting one because it's a Spanish style on the outside and craftsman on the inside, which is very LA. It's a bit of a hybrid, and so we're always dealing with the found. And so the project was it had to kind of figure out what to express, what not. Also, we're making something new, and we're making something that's going to be twice as big as the original. And so how do you kind of bring those two things together? So this is an early kind of study model of how we might think about the joint between the old and the new. Very flush, thinking about the coarse and the smooth, the rough and the smooth, but also expressing the logics of a kind of hybrid between a Spanish and a craftsman. So the dormer, the deep eave with the dormer poking out is kind of a really ubiquitous kind of language of craftsman construction, and then the stucco is more in the world of the Spanish, and so trying to kind of think about that. So it ended up being a bit of a mullet. It's like Spanish in the front and craftsman in the back. But yeah, I think we really, piles of gravel, thinking about asphalt shingles, thinking about stucco, like it's like you gotta fall in love with the thing, otherwise you're, fighting against it forever. So these were really early models. This is the plan. So just to give you an idea of the logic of the house, maybe this slide is better. The house moves along a certain axis, and the second floor, which is the primary suite, is a rotated volume that's kind of set inside it like a table. And the joint between the two is a staircase that sort of negotiates the rotation, right, and moves you from downstairs to upstairs. There's an ADU down below, so it's a 3-story house. So we also had to sort of figure out how to make like a 3-story, like massive thing on a very steep hillside and sort of like hide the bottom floor. So this is, again, from the world of like, so much of the things we make are actually tools for communication with other people. So we made this framing model so that we could convince the contractor that this wasn't complicated, because they see the first thing and they're like, it's going to cost a lot of money, and you're like, no, like, look, it's made the same way you make all the other things. So there's like so much of what we do is really about like a conversation with other kinds of makers, and so moving up in scale and resolution and our model making, you'll see in the final thing, the roof line has changed a lot and starting to get into those interior views. So, on the left, you see that rotated stair, which is sort of pinning together the second floor, which impresses itself on the first floor by having an exposed ceiling grid, which you'll see in a minute. And there's that, on the right-hand side, you're seeing the kind of slot between the new and the old, or between those two volumes. On the right-hand side is a hangout kind of family space, and then the parents, and then the view all the way down site. So thinking again about materials and how we're gonna work. First of all, this project is also extremely low budget. The clients were like, we had to deliver this under $1 million, which I know sounds like, already a lot, but in LA, it's like impossible. 3 stories, like, 2,700 square feet. It's a feat. So a lot of it is about just figuring out like what we can do with the simplest stuff, and how we can start to get to texture, et cetera. So the like abject sort of flagstone thing, is now like, I love it. So here it is now. This is what's happening. This is last week. So we've pretty much finished framing. You can see the balcony, the kind of inverted dormer there, and how it's coming together and the kind of context around it. Here we are, this similar photo on the left as you saw in the model, and it's always shocking that it's like, oh, it's actually what I wanted it to be. Like surprise, the clients are like, what do you mean you're surprised? I was like, oh, I guess it worked, like amazing. And also amazing that like other people saw this and understood it and built it. I mean, that's kind of crazy. Here's this kind of double height space that's produced by that rotation. That's where the dining room will be, with light coming in from above. All of that will be exposed, framing on the left. Here's that view from the hangout space going down. Another view of the stair and kind of more directly. And then here's a view we discovered when, over on the left where you see the bay window, you see a kind of wedge. That's where the rotation, the kind of plumb wall and the rotated wall create this little piece of volume. And when we were building it, first of all, the view from there is insane. And we hadn't planned for a window, but it sort of became like, well, we have to, and we have to use that wedge as a bench, so you're really situated in that crack. And here's some of elevations of what it's going to look like at the end, if we can convince them on this color palette, TBD. Here's some views of that, and there's the back. And here it is from above right now. I've got one more project to show you. This isn't so bad. It's been 21 minutes. You guys okay? So this last project is a project I'm doing with Katy. And what I didn't say in the beginning is, my background is in literature, and then I worked at Art Forum for a long time. So I come from like an art background and came into architecture late. And so it's been this wonderful sort of return to collaborating with artists, primarily Katy, but now also working with Christina Quarles and other artists in LA, which has been, Christina, who's an Anderson Ranch person also, yeah. So that's opened up a whole other way of working and thinking, which is a pleasure. So Katy has a big show coming up at the National Portrait Gallery in London. and invited me to kind of participate as exhibition designer. So the initial, this is the kind of what the National Portrait Gallery is, which is just a saturated, I'll use an architecture word, enfilade, like room into room of of this kind of salon, intense, historical, weighty thing. And the initial vision was for Katy to intervene in the galleries. But through a series of unfortunate events, unfortunate for you, fortunate for me, you didn't get to do that. And so here I came and I was like, don't worry, Katy, we'll put this inside your room, right? We're gonna build the rooms in the room. So, you guys are familiar with Katy's work, this slide, less necessary, but like thinking about portraiture, thinking about landscape, thinking about the formal portraits, thinking about the kind of domestic or political work that Katy does. There's all kinds of, for me, there was a need to think about all kinds of containers, right? So the project became, this idea of creating rooms within the room and to start to work with the kind of space within and the space without as co-equal sort of narrative strains in the organization of the exhibition. So here you'll see my collage. I hate to draw. I'm like not good at it. So I collage instead. That's sort of what I do. And here it is as a model now, which is underway. It'll open in March. So essentially you have this gallery, which is like very formal and very kind of old fashioned. It has this thick black marble baseboard all along the perimeter. And my proposal was to insert these 3 rooms that kind of sequentially kind of devolve, right? Initially, the first room is whole, right? The second room starts to butt up against the perimeter and sort of crack. And then the third room is sort of incomplete. So I think the idea of sort of queering the room, queering the container, that was like a kind of a big theme for us. And how you would move from, let's say the first room is kind of identity work, right? Moving into the black ovals and the black portraits, and then finally into these kind of the surfers and the football players. But all the while, there's kind of this emphasis on these 3, but the interstitial space between produces a whole other kind of set of sequences. So while these things are sort of disparate, they're locked together with this enfilade. So I don't know if you can tell, but the archway is the entry in, and the kind of doorway is actually set apart. So when you come in, you don't see that yet. And then you kind of turn and you're presented with this view, right? And kind of all of the relationships between. So that's the view from kind of the beginning of the show to the end, and this is the view back down. In the space between, we found all these sort of resonances, like in starting to hang the show, starting to look at how the inside and the outside can start to draw relationships. But, the parallax of the body moving, I think, is going to write many narratives in there. So that's going to be exciting to see. On the left, you have this kind of sawtooth linear where you're coming from Beau, which is Katy's alter ego, and looking at self-portrait nursing. So there's a kind of, it was interesting to think how many different, like chronological, sequential, formal, informal, like how many different things we could pile into this one thing. That was joy for me. So here's some more kind of views of that. And yeah, this is sort of looking back from self-portrait nursing to seeing self-portrait cutting on my back, and then Beau. So there's these kind of moments where you turn around and the return is like, presents a different set of work. Yeah, so that's what I have for you. Yeah, a range of things. Thank you. It's so fun to be here. Come check out what we're doing.
Thank you. Stay right here. We're going to hop both of you up front, and we're going to accept some questions.
Hold
hold it?
Yep. Ah!
Okay. All right.
All right.
Wow, that was great.
Thank you.
That's really exciting.
Thank you both. So
Yeah.
first off, do we have any questions from the audience?
I know.
Because I have one. For both of your practices, it sounds like y'all do a lot of negotiating, and it's either negotiating with the person having their portrait done or the person that you're interviewing with, or it's negotiating with the client and also with the space. At what point have y'all figured out to push and to pull, and how do you approach negotiations with your material, essentially?
You want to start?
Do you want? I feel like I'm in this architecture world with my head. I'm like, well,
I get in my life, yeah.
well, actually, I want to talk about a teeny bit about this project that I'm doing this year, where I'm photographing people who are 60, and the people who are coming to me are willing to do it. I haven't decided if I'm going to show them the pictures yet. I mean, they know they're part of the project, right? But so this negotiation for me at this point is it's partly where the people are, but it's also an artist to a non-artist, and that there has to be trust. But I don't know if I'm giving a very straight answer, but I'm thinking a lot about each time I make a portrait. I'm also not interested in making pictures that gotcha portraits, but on the other hand, and anyone who takes pictures of people seriously knows that, you can't also really let people pick. That sounds really harsh, but I mean, art, making an art portrait is different from making a senior picture or something like that, for example. So I think there's that level. I could talk more about that, but I think I want to hear what you have to say.
No, that sounds great. I mean, yeah, it's really complicated when you're dealing with like something that is for most people their entire life savings and where they're going to spend the rest of their life probably. It'd be like, no, this is the carpet you're going to have, or like, so there's that. But I was going to say, like, and that's just a relationship, really kind of a relationship, and then, kind of convincing someone, getting someone to enjoy risk, things like that. But I think on a more fundamental level, I think I was talking to you guys about this, either the projects I'm getting are really interesting, or I've gotten better at like sublimating my desires into the things that are, And I think that sort of, the negotiation is turned inward to sort of, making mountains out of molehills, like trying to tease out the project out of the obliquely situated thing, like often trying to find the project that the client, it doesn't matter to the client if this is what I'm doing or not, But often the clients I find, at least the clients I work with, they're excited to have something to engage with and to convince them to, just go 3 feet further with the, tile, it'll do something, and it's like, you don't like it, you'll change it in, 10 years, whatever. So I don't know if it's answering the question, but it lives in many domains. But right now, most importantly to me and to the work we're doing is that it's actually where the project is rather than this thing you have to deal with,
Yeah, that's excellently put.
I have just a layering feedback loop, and I think it in some ways it also to me relates to teaching, and it's a matter of being excited about what you're doing and meeting. I think what you're saying is also meeting people where they are and getting them excited, but they have to trust you, and they have to trust that you care about them and what they have to offer in their engagement. And I feel like that there's some relationship there between what you do. Exactly. Yeah. And I think it requires that, me at least, and I don't know about you, that I have to sublimate. You use that word. It can't look at everything like this has to be the best art ever, and I have to be like, okay, I'll photograph you on the beach or, in the sunlight, in the bright sunlight. And I know you can't always make those but I guess probably creatively you might have to sometimes be like, okay, we have to find a place where I can't, I don't know, I have to sometimes, meet them where they are.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and then I also have to tell them no.
Yeah.
sometimes when they're like picking some tile. That's
Yeah.
and I'm like, no. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's like me not letting them choose
exactly.
which
Like,
picture.
there's
Yeah.
sort of a moment where like I only put the materials on the table that I can live with, Sometimes they'll bring, like, somebody was like, we stopped at the outlets and we bought this tile for $100. And I'm like, we'll break it into pieces and put it in the concrete and make an interesting collage, and so we find a way, anyway. So.
Okay. Hi. So in photography, you have like your vision and then the subject that you're photographing. And then in architecture, you have your, I guess, belief set. I'm an architect, so I can say that. You have your belief about how the world works, but then you have your clients. It's your client's shelter. So I'm guessing what I'm asking is, in your opinion, your most successful projects, what has been the balance between yourself and either, I guess, your subject? Like how, what identity is the alpha identity there in the finished project? And what sort of balance do you find most successful and satisfying? Does that make sense? Does that make any sense at all?
No, it's a good
Okay.
question. It's a good question.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's a great question. Because I think actually weirdly the 13-year-olds that I photographed, I'll just very quickly say what happened is I took the pictures, and as I said, they kind of forgot about them. A lot of them totally forgot. This one kid who was like made the best video ever, and I thought about them for 5 years, and they walked into the show, and this person had actually transitioned to a girl during that time, and she totally had forgotten. And so I had spent 5 years thinking really intensely about this person and her video, and there were a couple other kids who came to the show who'd kind of forgotten about it, but there were also a couple who came who were really afraid. So there's 18-year-olds looking at pictures of themselves when they were 13, and there's one boy, and he was just really scared to see his picture, and then when he saw it, he was like, oh, it's okay, it's not that bad. And I know this doesn't relate directly to it, but they had to trust me or not care at all. But the ones that came back and looked at their pictures, it was a really beautiful experience, having them look at themselves 5 years later. So I guess in some ways I would say that's the most successful. For me, the pictures of my kids, they're like, yeah, it's us and whatever. But I feel like that project in particular was like the 5 year, when I finally had the show 5 years later, it was really pretty profound in terms of that. I'm not sure if that exactly answers the question, but I love that you're asking this question about the response from the person you're working with or the subject. And I think that it's tricky to care about it too much, really. But when it works, it feels really good in a way that I don't, without show in particular, it wasn't about me. I wanted, like, my fantasy was like everyone to be like, oh, Betsy Schneider is such a great photographer, and wow. And what really happened is like people were like, wow, these are really, I'm really moved, and I'm thinking about what it's like to be 13. And so I was kind of just the conduit for these ideas, and that was a really powerful experience for me to be like, it's not about me. It's not about, like, really good art isn't about you in the end. It isn't about the artist. It's about the ideas that it kind of flows through you. So, all right, I'll give it to you now.
Yeah, it's a really hard question, kind of authorship, really, and let's see, there's so many ways I am thinking about answering that. On one hand, I want to say, there's me and the client, but there's actually many, many more players in that. There's the city. So like everything about that project, let's say the rough house, is like every single degree and dimension is controlled by the limitations of the setbacks, by fire ratings, by, material cost, by, all this stuff, that's like sort of, on one hand, one could be like, But it's also like a relief, right? It takes like I'm not, I didn't author it, the city and their bounding envelope, whatever. The client authored it because the client wanted this program in it. They wanted these things, you know. And there's a kind of funny place where it's like you'd think all of those constraints would add up to producing a thing, but actually they're never enough. Like they never actually make the thing. Like there's still always some other like thought or other desire, right? Because somebody else would have made a very different resolution of those things. So I think that I am finding it easier to look back and understand the common interests between all of the work rather than kind of sitting at the beginning of a project and being like, I do, you know, some people have started to say like, well, you do angles. I'm like, oh, do I? You know, or whatever. Like, it's like, you know, there's themes and there's kind of recurring interests, you know, that kind of emerge in the work, but they're always somehow muddied, you know, and then I actually find that the thing that I like the most is a thing that I didn't know that I was gonna do or have to do. Like, there's all kinds of, again, like there's all kinds of things that this house, like so many compromises that I'm like, my God, like that window, like the header is like, it interrupts the line, but like, or the discovery of that bay window, like there wasn't gonna be a window in there, right? It was gonna be that, you know, and then, oh shit, well, you can't not put a window there. So, and that's become my favorite part of the project. So there's, you know, just to say there's so many voices in it, the builders, the, you know, the clients, the city, et cetera. So it's very, yeah. Yeah, I think that I feel lucky that I started my career in teaching rather than building. So I had very little. Like I've worked in an office for a total of 18 months and hated it, right? Like I found it so boring and, you know, all of that. So I was like, I'm just gonna do it myself. And I'm trying to remember what sorry, I lost track of my thought there, but compromise. Oh yeah, so I started by teaching, right? So I sort of got lucky and I got invited to teach right out of grad school. And so I started my career first in like thinking a lot about architecture, which was also sort of problematic because I had too much time to think and not enough experience, right? And so I got all stuck in my head. And I've now come around to, Rome was amazing for me because it was sort of like time and space to think, like what you guys are doing here. It was like a year of like, just waiting for something to happen, you know? And there, I think something really started to click, and I feel lucky that I got a chance to like develop an attitude about architecture because otherwise it's like getting into a stormy ocean. Like it's like everything has a demand on you, and unless you have some clarity of like what you wanna do, it's hard to stay focused. But you also have to stay like open to the accidents and the learning that comes from it. So it takes a long time. Just to say, I'm talking to Danielle specifically because you're in architecture and like, it's tough. Yeah. I mean, probably it's true for everybody, but yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I think one thing about being a singular artist, I'm not a very good collaborator, and I don't deal very well with disappointment imposed by other people, or I don't know if that's true. And teaching actually makes me much more patient in a lot of ways, but I think like how much you have to compromise in what you do. I compromise with the camera, right? I get disappointed the pictures don't turn out right. I do have to negotiate with the subject, but really that's very different from what the kind of negotiation you have to do. And I think the fact that you can still find ways to let go a little bit, like that ability to let go. And I mean, I guess analogy is between letting go of ideas that don't work. But I think that, I mean, that's very impressive, and it's very, it's essential almost to be able to continue to find pleasure in what you do, like to be happy about the discoveries that you make when things don't go the way you want them. And you have to hold things loosely, right, to a certain extent. But then something you also, I mean, you're building $1 million addition to a house, right? Like I'm like, oh, so what? It's a $50 piece of film. Anyway.
You have to forget that part.
Yeah,
You have to just say like, I see you, you know, showing like bodies of work and this body of work and that body of work, and architecture is so slow, you know, I'm so jealous of like, And then, simultaneously, I was doing this other, it's like, you have to at some point sort of be like, it's one of many, and like, I'm only gonna be good, like, architects really only get good in their 60s and 70s.
That's
which is really
exciting.
nice.
That's
Yeah, so
exciting.
it's like
That's
there's
cool.
The pressures
That's cool. But you make something that people exist in, you know what I mean? And that's pretty profound. That's a pretty big big thing.
Thank you both. We are out of time for questions, but no,
I know.
ask your questions up front. Go talk with them. They're super nice people. Thank you both very much for a wonderful
Yeah,
lecture.
thanks everyone. That was fun.
It was really great.
It was like,
I really loved seeing
yeah, likewise. Yeah, really in awe. It's great.